Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. Our next guest argues that Islam is too big and too successful to be the work of just one spirit. Tracing the pagan religions of the nations around ancient Israel, he makes the bold claim that the religion of Muhammad is actually a collaboration by the old gods of Mesopotamia, a desperate partnership of fallen angels who are caught off guard by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Derek Gilbert hosts Skywatch TV, a weekly Christian television program, and co-hosts Sci Friday, a weekly television program that looks at science news with his wife, author, and analyst Sharon K. Gilbert. Derek is a Christian, a husband, a father, and the author of the groundbreaking books The Great Inception and Last Clash of the Titans. He's also the co-author with Josh Beck of a book that exposes the occult origins of the modern UFO phenomena, The Day the Earth Stands Still. Derek is a popular conference speaker and has been a professional broadcaster for nearly 4 decades. He's a lifelong fan of the Chicago Cubs, prefers glasses to contacts, and he's been known to sing the high part in barbershop and gospel quartets. Derek is a featured guest here on Revealing the Truth and appears on the second Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour. Joining us now to talk about his newest book, Bad Moon Rising, Islam, Armageddon, and the Most Diabolical Double Cross in History, is my good friend Derek Gilbert. Derek, welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth.
Honored to be here as always. Thank you.
Great to see you, my friend. Followed your travels in Israel. You were actually literally 10 steps, 10 days in front of us the entire way. While we were there, we came right on the heels of your trip. How was that? And then you and Sharon went off to England to do some occult research in some of the very well-known antiquities and occult centers in England, which is her passion for her novels and some of the novel work that the fiction work that you do as well. So how was the trip for you, Zev, Carl, and the whole crew?
Well, it was a true blessing. And yes, we can't leave out that Pastor Carl Gallups and Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat were with us in Israel and brought some amazing teachings. Zev showed us a location that he believes, based on his research, was the actual site of the tomb of Jesus, the actual crucifixion site of Jesus, being on the Mount of Olives. But the site of the tomb that he showed us, based on his research, is now a parking lot. And that was kind of the way our tour went. We saw a lot of sites that you wouldn't normally see on a package tour. And it was really incredible. Now, I hope the weather was a little cooler when you got there, because the daily highs when we were in Israel, which is really unusual for the month of May, were in excess of 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We hit 44 degrees centigrade one day, which I think was like 107, 108, something like that. And some of us, myself included, I was probably affected as much as anybody on the tour by the heat. I just don't handle the heat well. It's all this Northern European blood, apparently, or the fact that I'm just in not very good shape. But I had to cut short a few days because it was either I stop now or somebody's going to have to call an ambulance. It was really getting to that point. And it must give credit to the people who accompanied us. We had about 80 people on the tour, and most dealt with it really well. But boy, it was blazing hot several days. We saw several sites that just aren't on the regular tours, and it was to the credit of Lipkin Tours, and I have to give Aaron Lipkin and his team kudos for putting this together, because these not being on the regular path required extra logistical work to accommodate our requests. We saw Gilgal Rephaim, which is a site in the Golan Heights that was rediscovered in 1968 after Israel reclaimed the Golan Heights in the Six-Day War, called the Wheel of Giants. That's what Gilgal Rephaim essentially means. It's probably about 5,000 years old, maybe even older than that, and certainly has some cultic function, probably connected to the veneration of ancestors, which was a key element in the religion of the pagans around ancient Israel. Veneration of the dead, veneration of the ancestors. Those clues are salted throughout the Bible if you know what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Sharon and I are currently writing a book that'll be out in the fall all about this and how it's manifested in Scripture, not just in the writings of the prophets, like Isaiah and Ezekiel especially, but how it also manifests in end times prophecy, which is also part of Bad Moon Rising. So we saw that. That was an incredible sight. We went to Joshua's altar, discovered in 1980 or rediscovered by the archaeologist Adam Zertal, who just recently passed away. It's on Mount Ebal, overlooking the ancient city of Shechem, which is now Nablus. And again, that is off the beaten path. We had to get an IDF escort and armored buses to get up there. And then we had to walk almost a mile with our IDF escorts down to the site, because Nablus is still to this day a site connected with Palestinian terrorist activity. Now, we didn't have any incidents, but being able to stand in the place where Joshua, and on top of the very stones that comprised the altar, where Joshua made that declaration, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." That was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And to be able to teach and preach there, as Carl and Zev did as well, just an amazing, amazing thing. And of course, we saw the usual sites like the Mount of Olives, with the Garden of Gethsemane, and we actually were able to ascend to the Temple Mount. We were on the Temple Mount, which surprised us because it was the month of Ramadan.
Right.
But we were allowed up there, and that was an incredible thing. So just a time of blessing and fellowship and friendship. We made some new friends that I know we're going to be friends with for the rest of our lives. Now, the UK portion of our tour, Sharon and I went on alone. Some friends in the UK were gracious enough to shuttle us around. Juan Renau came down from southern Scotland, and then John and Parsons and his wife Terry came from northern Scotland to pick us up for the rest of the way. But not only were this really helpful for Sharon, who's been writing about these sites from her imagination and pictures from the internet. So for her to be able to see, the cathedral at Canterbury, where the Archbishop of Canterbury presides over the Church of England, the Abbey of Glastonbury, where King Arthur is allegedly buried, not really, but still, it was nice to see, and driving past Stonehenge, other megalithic sites, but also some divine appointments that were made while we were there, including one that was unexpected at the site of a home owned by Aleister Crowley 100 years ago, one of the most influential occultists of our day. To this day, a man who called himself the Great Beast 666, who influenced L. Ron Hubbard into the occult direction that he took, and forming a religion that has deceived so many, including many in Hollywood. Jack Parsons, who was an occultist, who founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And just Crowley's influence on our world really is not appreciated by most Christians. And so we were able to visit the site overlooking Loch Ness, where he performed a ritual back in 1913 that it led reportedly to a lot of paranormal activity throughout the rest of his life. But while we were there looking for this site, we happened across two dear, sweet ladies from Scotland walking along this road, and thought, well, they must be local, so they'll know where this house is, called Boleskine House. They thought we were either Christians or cultists. They weren't sure about why we were looking for Boleskine House until we started talking with them and found out they were prayer warriors who had taken the bus 2 hours from Glasgow to come to this place and just happened to arrive. And they'd been praying for 2 years for God to grant them permission to make this trip. And it just happened that on that day, and at that very minute that we were driving down this road along the shore of Loch Ness, they were walking from the bus stop, which was miles away, to get to this spot. And so we joined them in prayer, and they left a scroll containing the text of Isaiah 61 there at the cemetery below where Crowley's house was, in a plastic and in a sealed space now, so to reclaim that for Scotland. Of course, Isaiah 61 is the text that Jesus read in the synagogue in Nazareth, where Sharon and I had just been 2 weeks earlier. And then when he rolled up the scroll, said, "Today, this is fulfilled in your hearing." So that was an amazing thing that had to be arranged by God, because there were a number of other things that went into how we got there at that particular moment. But had we been 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later, we would probably never have met these ladies. So anyway, as a result of all of that, we may well be going back to Scotland next year. So certainly a divine appointment. And on the spot where Aleister Crowley was literally summoning demons from hell.
You know, it's so interesting that over the years that you and I have been talking, I've gotten great insight into the depth of research that you do, and I really do consider you one of the most skilled researchers that I've come in contact with. And the depth of your research, the detail in which you go through, and the source materials that you use for the foundations of your book are quite extraordinary. It's Library of Congress type of research that we're talking about, and peer-reviewed materials that with citations from people everywhere, from Dr. Michael Heiser to great historical experts in mythology and in history, and going back and chronicling all the ancient research which has been done by the ancient historians and archaeologists to put together the factual, not the theoretical, but the factual foundations, doing the deep dive into all of this, to put out books which are very much, I think, stand alone within Christian nonfiction. And that is that they are both historically accurate, which many books are not. Many books are based on doctrinal teachings that were from seminary, and they quote a professor, they quote a scholar, they quote someone who has hypothesized this and taught it, and now it becomes truism for them. You go way beyond what man has said, and you verify, you confirm, and I'm not sure what your specific methodology is, but it usually appears to be a minimum of 3 citations to establish something as being consistently agreed upon, and that's kind of the way God's Word is that when we see it the 3rd time in His Word, it now establishes as a pattern of God. And so I think your work subscribes and exemplifies that kind of research. Just the fact that in this new book, Bad Moon Rising, you have 532 specific citations in the back of the book.
I didn't realize it was that many. Wow.
532. So I know that this book, and this is really going to be for our audience part 1 of maybe 2 or even 3 discussions, because it's an extraordinarily extensive read, and it's both historical, it is biblical, and it takes us into the realm of not mythology, because that's really a term we attribute to the Greeks, but to the false gods of the various nations mentioned in the Bible, and exploring the historical context, which I teach 4 in-person venues a week, live teaching, and I always start out with the statement that if you don't understand the historical, the social, political, and economic environment of the writings of Scripture, what was happening, what the culture was at the time, you can't discern what is and what is not. I think that one of the better examples is we know that Eleazar in the negotiations for the hand of Rebekah would not eat the meal that was set before him until the terms were agreed to. Mm-hmm. When we look at the pattern of Jacob negotiating with Laban, it is not confirmed, the covenant isn't confirmed by a meal, and therefore did Laban really deceive him by giving him Leah and not Rachel? And when he asked for the hand of his wife, he doesn't mention Rachel by name. He just says, mm-hmm. Now I've worked 7 years, give me my wife. He doesn't say my wife Rachel. So there's 2 very distinct missing components in there. One is the customary confirmation of the covenant by the breaking of bread, and 2, the very specific statement, giving my wife Rachel. Well, unless we know about the cultural, the customs of the time and how covenants were confirmed, and we see what's not there, then we don't understand how all this. We just think that Laban was just a master deceiver, and the fact is that Isaac didn't do a very good job of training up Jacob, and we know that, and so we see that, and this is evidenced in this particular narrative that he didn't pass on to him the customs. Abraham knew because he had lived there. Eleazar knew because he found out from his master, from Abraham, what the customs were, and so this wasn't passed. So it's kind of like what was missing became obvious in the narrative if you knew the culture of the time, and that's, I think, what you do an extraordinary job of in great detail. So this new work really has been a long-term effort for you.
I first gave a presentation on this in August of 2017, so it's been about a year and a half in the works, but it draws on a lot of research that I've done for the other books, The Great Inception and Last Clash of the Titans. It just seemed to me that Islam as a religion was unique among religions that emerged from antiquity, and really it's sort of like late antiquity, because Muhammad really began preaching in the early 6th century, or early 7th century, forgive me, about the year 610 was when he got his revelation, 622 when he moved to Medina, passed away in the year 632. Many other religions from the ancient world, especially from the Near East, like Zoroastrianism, Mithraism, for example, the pagan religions of Greece and Rome, have essentially faded away to almost nothing. And yet the religion that came from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, both among the Jews and among Christians, has persisted and grown to this day. Although the last half of the 20th century and through the present day, Christianity has been losing membership while Islam continues to grow. And there are a couple of trends that are responsible for that. First of all, demographically, we in the Northern Hemisphere, especially we Europeans, Caucasians, we're just not having enough children to replace our population. So our populations are aging and beginning to shrink, whereas the nations where populations that are growing, where they're having more than 2.1 live births per woman, tend to be Islamic in the southern or from the Southern Hemisphere. And so that's one factor. The other, of course, is that we as Christians are just not doing a good job of teaching our children and our grandchildren why the Word of God can be trusted, why it is the Word of God. The Bible is not, mutable, flexible, changeable. You can't pick and choose from the Bible what you want, as like going through a cafeteria line. But until we explain to them through the teaching of apologetics how they know, first of all, that this was the Word of God transmitted to the prophets and the apostles, and secondly, that it hasn't been changed over the centuries to suit the whims of kings and princes, until we do that, they're just going to think, well, I can take this or leave it. Whereas among Muslims, it's not really about having faith in Allah or even Muhammad. You just have to submit. You just have to say the Shahada, which means submitting. And that's how Muhammad in the early 7th century changed from a not very successful preacher who only managed to convert his immediate family after 10 years of preaching. He had about 100 followers, was kicked out of Mecca, had to flee to Medina, and there he hit on a winning strategy. Hey, I don't care what you believe as long as you submit. Just say there is no God but Allah and I'm his only prophet, and you're in the club. And then we can go out and raid camel caravans, steal all their stuff and keep it, take the women, and if you die in the attempt, Allah says you're going to get even more of this stuff in the afterlife. It's a religion that plays on the basest instincts of humanity, especially men, and rewards and promises even greater carnal rewards in the afterlife. Unlike Christianity, we believe that Jesus said that in heaven we'll be like the angels there, neither marrying nor giving in marriage. Among Islam, Men are promised an endless supply of supernatural hotties who will satisfy their every whim. And to be politically incorrect here, frankly, there's some indications in the Quran that there will be young serving boys for that purpose as well. Not to mention all kinds of rich food and rivers of wine. It is fundamentally, diametrically opposed to the teachings of Jesus Christ. And yet, this false religion, these doctrines of demons, has continued to grow and accumulate followers to where by the year 2070, according to research by the Pew Research Group, by 2070, within 50 years, Islam will have more followers on planet Earth than any other religion, replacing Christianity as the number one religion on the earth. I believe that this is because the principalities and powers that the Apostle Paul warned us about, the fallen angels and their demonic minions, were caught by surprise by the resurrection of Jesus. Paul refers to this in 1 Corinthians 2, verses 6 through 8, and I'll paraphrase. He says, if the archons, the rulers of this age, he's talking about these principalities, these supernatural entities, if they had understood the mystery that Paul was revealing to his followers, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. They didn't understand, and Pastor Carl Gallups has talked about this too in his most recent book, what Satan didn't know. If they had known that they were helping Jesus fulfill his mission by sending him to the cross, they would never have done it.
You know,
they did.
Yeah, the pattern of the Bible of this prophetic move is set in Genesis 3:15. This is the beginning of all things prophetic, and that is the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. We know the seed of the woman being Jesus, the seed of the serpent being the Antichrist. So this is now a pathway of clearing that God is going to do through nations and peoples that are going to interfere with the seed line and try to annihilate the seed line, which are the Jews, throughout history. So we know that this persecution, this annihilation from Pharaoh to Haman, to Herod, to Hitler, to the modern day Islamic movement is all lined up with eliminating the seed line. First, to thwart the birth of the seed of the woman, Messiah, and then once he was born, was to eliminate him and prevent his return. But yet, Matthew 23:37 through 39, Jesus declares, you're not going to see me until the Jews cry out for my return. So it's like a reprieve for Satan. I'm going to double down now because of the fact that I'm being given a second chance. If I can still get the Jews out of the picture, then there's nobody to call for Jesus' return. There's a very simple thread line through all of this. And the interesting part about Islam, it is a comparative. Everything in Islam, in the Quran, the Hadith, are comparative. Even there's only, Allah is the only comparative. Muhammad is the only comparative. Everything is relative versus something else. Everyone who doesn't believe in what you believe is an infidel. They're wrong. You have the right to kill them. If you can't convert them, then kill them. And so this model is this was the pathway of all the false gods and the false gods' impact going back to before the days of Terah, which we're introduced to as the father of Abraham, and he was an idol maker. And so, you know, what's so fascinating is that mainstream Christianity, of course, denies most of this and anything which we would call in the supernatural or unseen realm. And I think that the Bible itself has lost its luster as being the single most supernatural thing ever given to mankind, is from the third heaven, this impartation of one book, one author, is given to man. You know, if we would have unearthed this in a crash of a UFO with some long green dead guy oozing some primordial slime, and in his hand was a metal case, and we unlocked that metal case, and voila, was this document that we call the Testament of God, the Bible. We would be absolutely, the whole world would be set on its edge and want to know everything that was contained within it, and everybody would be just going nuts. All media attention around the world would be focused on this one thing. But yet, God has already given us all of this, and we've just made it where, like, oh well, okay, so we have the most supernatural thing ever given to us, but oh well, I can do whatever I want and believe what I want, and it's just lost so much of its power, so much of its authority, that people like yourself, myself, and our audiences are really stunned. That I'm in awe every time I pick up the Bible and read it. I'm just in absolute awe that I have this supernatural document in my hand, breathed. The breath of God, the same breath that spoke this world into existence, spoke this word into existence. And it might even be easier for me as a Jew to comprehend it than it is for Christians, because we have the concept of a scribe or a sofer in Judaism, the one who actually writes, who pens the copies of the Torah scrolls that we read. So we know how revered that process is, and that every letter is counted, every word is said, every scroll is just like has the same number of letters as every other scroll that was before it and every other scroll that is to come, so that through the generations that nothing is added to or taken away. We know that process. I don't think that the Christian world really understands, other than the Gutenberg press, that how the Bible was produced. So it loses something in that translation. We're talking with Derek Gilbert, author of the soon-to-be released. We're coming up, we're about a month out on release date, but still you can pre-order on Amazon, and it is one of the best-selling books on Islam already.
Which blows my mind.
You know, already before it's even been released. I happen to have a galley copy of it with red lines marked through it because of the editor's notes, and I'm very privileged to have had the opportunity to read it. And I keep referring back to it because I'm just fascinated by, there are a multitude of concepts in there that are interconnected, ancient and contemporary, that all of a sudden find a way to fit together like this amazing jigsaw puzzle. The book is called Bad Moon Rising, Islam, Armageddon, and the Most Diabolical Double Cross in History, by author Derek Gilbert. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue in this discussion with Derek Gilbert. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and as we do on the second Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour, we meet with Derek Gilbert, and today we're talking about his newest book, Bad Moon Rising, Islam, Armageddon, and the Most Diabolical Double Cross in History. Derek Gilbert, welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth.
Thank you. Thank you.
Derek, you did extensive research. The source materials that you found to go back into what I consider to be the gods of old, the false gods of old. Prior to the time of Abraham, the birth of monotheism, paganism and false gods were introduced to Ra early on in the Egyptian narrative. We're all familiar with the sun gods and the moon gods, but not to the extent that the research that you've done and the historical documents have done to show how many false gods there have been, all celestial beings, even to the point of the moon gods, the sun gods, looking at that, how many? How extensive? What was the from your research? What was the thought that the creation was something that could not be of man, and there had to be a higher power? Or was this a universal thought throughout the ancient days?
What's interesting, and there are more gods than we can really count, because there are a lot of texts that have been lost from the ancient world. So we don't know some of them. Some of them are only mentioned in passing in a few texts that have been found. So what we can do is focus on the major ones. What I tried to do in Bad Moon Rising is focus on the ones that seem to have the most impact on Israel through the writings of the prophets and the apostles, and then focus on those. What was unique about Yahweh, the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is that he alone among the gods of the ancient world was considered pre-existent. He spoke, created all things, and then exercised total dominion over the earth. Although his created beings, both angelic and human, God in his wisdom chose to create with free will. And sadly, that the only way you can eliminate evil, and this is a common complaint by skeptics and atheists, if there was a God, how could he let these horrible things happen to people? Well, that's a consequence of free will. The only way to stop bad people from doing bad things to good people is by denying us the choice, to the ability to choose to do evil things. Anyway, Yahweh created all things and is supreme. He is the God of all gods. In the pagan nations, their minds, all of their gods, even their so-called creator gods like El, Enlil, Dagon, Baal Haman, Kronos, Saturn, they were born or created. There was no pre-existent anthropomorphic deity. Zeus was not pre-existent. He was created. He was born. He was the son of Kronos, who was the son of Uranus and Gaia, who sort of were pre-existent, but they too had a beginning. Only Yahweh alone. The Hebrews were unique in this, that their God pre-existed all things and created all of these other gods, B'nai Ha-Elohim, during the process of creating the universe. Humanity being among the last of his creations and the pinnacle of creation, although created for a time a little lower than the angels, as we know from the New Testament. What started me down this research and led to this book was a passage in Genesis 15 that has kind of puzzled me for a long time, and it's why I've been doing so much research on a group of people that we know from the Bible as the Amorites. Until archaeologists in the 19th century started digging up Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and Israel, we didn't know much about the Amorites. It's like the ancient Hittites. We thought that they were a creation of the biblical writers until we started digging and found their capital city in Turkey. The Amorites appear to have emerged on the world stage in the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, around 2500 BC. They moved into Mesopotamia around 2000 BC. Around the time of Abraham, about 1900 BC, they emerge as the dominant political force in the lands of the Bible, what we know today as Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, even northern Egypt, southern Turkey, western Iran, dominated by tribal people called collectively the Amorites. Like the Israelites, they were tribal. They were divided into various tribes, and they fought with each other just like the tribes of Israel did. But the Amorites really set the religious and cultural tone for the lands of the Bible for the next 2,000 years. Here's a classic example. When Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, we're often taught in church that this symbolizes the humility of Jesus as Messiah. You know, he's the one who washed the feet, the suffering servant, washed the feet of his disciples, rode into Jerusalem on a donkey to fulfill the prophecy in Zechariah. Well, yeah, that was that, but it was also a symbol that was well understood by the people of Jerusalem. Kings rode donkeys. They didn't ride horses. Horses were for soldiers, commoners. Kings rode donkeys. We know this from texts found from Amorite kingdoms from the time of Abraham. Everybody knew what it meant. When here he came into Jerusalem riding on a donkey, here comes the king.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I completely agree with that. But in time of peace, they rode on donkeys. But on times of war, a king would ride on a horse. Thus, we see the Messiah coming into Jerusalem.
Exactly. When he returns, he will definitely be riding a horse.
And then he comes back riding on a horse, which is the symbol of the battle. So this gives us the kind of the full picture of the first this what they call the triumphal entry, although it was only a 4-day triumph, if you calculate it
from a worldly standard.
From a worldly standard, but yet it was ushering in his return. And when he comes back as that Ben David warring king, to come to take up his
Right.
rightful throne, which he did not ascend to.
But the point is, and this is the point you made before the break, that from our our modern Western perspective, especially as Americans with our tradition of, the cowboys riding the West, we tend to think of, and, the medieval knights of Western Europe, we tend to think of kings always riding on a magnificent steed, a powerful horse. That's a mount fit for a king, not a donkey. Why a donkey? But that was the symbol of kingship in the ancient world. And you're right. There's a difference between the king in peacetime and the king arriving to do battle. Yes, in war you're going to ride a horse, but from a Western perspective, we see a king riding a donkey, and we kind of look at that like that doesn't make any sense. Well, it doesn't to a 21st century American, but in the first century, if you're in Mesopotamia or the Levant, in Israel, Judea, yeah, it made perfect sense. He was signaling that here the king was entering his city, and that's exactly what that. So why the Amorites, and what was it that God said to Abraham in Genesis 15? What did he mean when he said, your descendants will be slaves in a land and will return in the fourth generation for the iniquity? The sin of the Amorites is not yet complete. So I've been reading everything I get my hands on about the Amorites from the scholars who've been studying them for the last 100 years. What did they believe? What was their culture? And who did they serve? Which gods did they serve? And then how did those gods, how were they manifest? What were their characteristics? And it began to emerge, I thought, and this is speculative, of course, because this is not explicit in the Bible, and that is the ultimate source of truth. So I will admit, this is speculative. But I believe that there are a number of the principal gods worshipped by the Amorites that are behind modern-day Islam. That, in other words, Allah is not one God. Allah is a conglomeration. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the gods behind the curtain. It's not just one, it's at least 7, in my view. The high god, or the creator god of the ancient Mesopotamians, the ancient Amorites, variously called, depending on the time and place, Enlil, El, Dagon, Kumarbi, Baal-Hamon, Kronos, or Saturn. That is the old god who was then replaced at the top of the pantheon by the storm god called Adad, Hadad, Baal in the Bible, but better known to us as the god of the Greeks and the Romans, Zeus, Jupiter, and Thor of the Germanic peoples and other places around the world. It's interesting that even in cultures like ancient India or the ancient Slavic people, the storm god or weather god emerged as king of the pantheon. Then you've got the sun god and the moon god, Shamash and Sin, who play a more prominent role in the Bible than most of us are aware. The goddess of sex and war, Ishtar, or Inanna to the Sumerians, in the Bible called Astarte. She also had a male aspect called Attar by the Amorites. Interestingly, the one god worshipped in Arabia, all over the Arabian Peninsula after the time of Jesus, was that male aspect of Astarte called Attar, the war god, which is, of course, significant. There's another god that I think is important that most of your viewers know, but they don't know that they know. And that's the god Resheph. Resheph was a plague god who spread plague with his arrows. He's depicted as a warrior, as an archer, but was also considered a god of horse warriors, chariot warriors, in other words. And significantly, a scholar by the name of Douglas Petrovich wrote an excellent and very detailed paper in which he makes the case for a pharaoh of Egypt called Amenhotep II. Amenhotep II being the god of the Exodus. The reason this is significant, and Doug didn't make this connection, but I've read this elsewhere and documented it in the book, that Amenhotep II took this Semitic god, Resheph, as his personal protector. Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting that the god of the pharaoh of the Exodus had for his personal protector a god of plagues who was the special protector of chariot warriors? Because Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, freed his people by sending plagues and then destroying the Pharaoh's chariot warriors. And then the final god in this supernatural corporate merger that makes up modern-day Islam is the war god called Chemosh by the Moabites. Now, he doesn't get a lot of play in the Bible, not very many mentions. Most of what we know about Chemosh is that he inspired the king of Moab, Mesha, to sacrifice his oldest son on the wall of his city while it was being besieged by the armies of Israel and Judah. But Chemosh was around a very long time. Chemosh was worshipped more than 2,000 years, well, almost 2,000 years before the time of Jehoshaphat in northern Syria at a city called Ebla. One of the city gates was named for Chemosh. And in fact, there's a city in what is now northern Syria, a very famous ancient city called Carchemish, that was named for this god, Chemosh. It means port of Chemosh. The reason Chemosh is interesting is because he was later adopted into the Greek pantheon as the god Ares, or Mars, the god of war. And if we know nothing else about Islam, over 1,400 years of history, is that it is a violent religion that uses war to spread its aims. You've got several warrior gods as part of this collective. Resheph, who was known to the Greeks, by the way, as Apollo, Apollyon in the book of Revelation, a warrior god there, the goddess of sex and war, Ishtar. And I also spend a portion of a chapter detailing some of the ways that modern Islam has deconstructed the gender roles that God established in the Bible for men, women, and children. It is disturbing, and we won't talk about it here, but if you've been paying attention to the news over the last few years, and some of the auctions of women by the Islamic State, you get an idea of where I'm going with this. This, I think, dates back to ancient Sumer and the destruction of the gender roles God established by the ancient goddess Ishtar or Inanna. The sun god, who is a very legalistic god, the one who gave the laws. Islam is extremely legalistic to the point where they have created a religion that allows them to perform, to do all kinds of evil, wicked things, and still claim to be righteous because they're within the boundaries of what had been revealed to Muhammad in the Quran and the Hadiths. And the moon god, who was the personal god of the Amorite founders of Babylon. Babylon, the source of the occult wickedness that became the symbol for the end times, one world church of the Antichrist. That was inspired by the moon god. And of course, you got the storm god, who Jesus specifically identified in the New Testament as Satan. And then again, this old dark god, Kronos, Saturn, El, Enlil, connected to the underworld, to the practice of human sacrifice, child sacrifice. I show in the book Bad Moon Rising where aspects of these various entities who comprised the major gods of the Amorites of the time of the prophets and the apostles, caught off guard by the resurrection. It is my belief that they form the core of what is now on track to become the world's largest religion, possibly within your lifetime and mine.
You know, it's so fascinating as you're talking, and I'm hearing the words Pharaoh, personal God to protect him from plagues and the chariots. Mm-hmm. This is now repeated in its entirety in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is pouring out the plagues again, and the word chariots is used, but what's so interesting, and I don't know if it was pointed out to you in Israel or not, but the Israeli-made tank,
yes, the Merkava,
is referred to by the local Hebrew speakers as a chariot.
Yep.
And therefore, until I started going to Israel, this was my 16th trip, but my first trip there, and it was pointed out to me that, this is a chariot. And I'm going, what do you mean? And so they explained to me, and I said, so now I can understand. There's a lot of things you can't understand in the book of Revelation. You may think that was a what was, as opposed to a what is or what is to come, but it actually is a what is and a what is to come. It was in like the Ben-Hur chariot. That was the original model of this, but today it's a weapon of war being used in Israel for defense purposes by the Israeli Defense Forces. So we're now seeing a convergence of what was steeped in fear. I know you went to Banyas, you went to Pan's temple. You saw where the true living author of fear was revered. The name Panic, Pandemonium, Panacea, all those are paying homage to the false god Pan. And that's where Jesus stood and said, I stand before you at the gates of hell, and these gates will not prevail. On this rock I will build my church. And these are the words he spoke to Shimon Kepha, Simon Peter. In that place you get to stand in exactly. You know you're not in some traditional site. You are there at the very spot. You can go look in the hole where they were dropping the sacrifices in, and experience that, and you can feel there's a shift in the atmosphere even today. Last year when we were there were actually satanic worshipers gathered together in a circle and were having an event in homage to Pan and to the angels of darkness that they still believe in. So when you see this convergence of these gods, it makes sense. It makes sense that there is no person of Allah. There is no incarnation. There is no death, resurrection. There is this shaheed. You become a martyr, and then only the martyrs get an audience before this false god Allah to petition on behalf of the family, so the family can make entrance into paradise. But no one ever returns to say whether or not the answer was yes or no. Therefore, we see the same scenario, that no one has ascended and descended from heaven except for one, and that is Jesus alone. And this is the construct, man-made construct of all which is false, and the very doctrine of Islam. This explains it, this combination of all these false gods into one, and we see this subjugation, this legalism, that the sexual sin of Baal, the spirit that permeates it, the remnant of the Ishmaelites, the Edomites, the Moabites, all coming together in their universal hatred of the seed line of Messiah, the Jews. And that's what tells you it is definitely not of God. But we've just scratched, barely, touched the dust cover of this book. When we get together in July for this hour, we're going to dig into and answer why Islam is the supernatural equivalent of a corporate merger, the iniquity of the Amorites, and how it really is affecting people today, the importance of the moon god then and now, how Islam history reflects the characteristics of the gods of Mesopotamia, the links between Mount Hermon, Petra, and Mecca, stunning connections, the rise and fall of the Antichrist, the part of the third temple and how it plays out in this, the death of the gods at Armageddon, and of course Islam's tragic role in the end times. All this in this new book, Bad Moon Rising, Islam, Armageddon, and the most diabolical double cross in history. Derek will be joining us in July, release week, I think, of the new book, and you'll be able to order it. You can pre-order it now at both Skywatch TV, Defender Publishing, and on Amazon. Get in line, because there'll be all kinds of exciting things. And subscribe to Skywatch TV on your Apple, on your, let's see, you can get it on Apple, you can get it on
Roku, and also now Amazon Fire TV. We've got an app for Fire TV now.
All right, great, on Fire TV, as well as a very, very active and robust YouTube channel, Skywatch TV. Derek Gilbert, always just a joy and a pleasure, and our best to everyone there at Skywatch and we thank you for a long-term and very valuable partnership. God bless you, my friend.
It's my honor. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.